Italy? Whiskey? Ah, Italy, you could never lock my secret. Oh no, suddenly. I don't leave it. Let's begin. Indeed.
All right. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you may be. Welcome back to Honey Badger Radio and the Fireside Chat. And on today's Fireside Chat, I am speaking with Dr. Kelli Palfy, I'm sorry, who is actually, we're going to find out exactly what she is, but she has a lot of overlap with our interests here at HBR, in particular, talking about male sexual abuse. And what I mean by that is, of course, the abuse of men, and why it is a important subject that no one seems to want to talk about. So, Kelli, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
All right. So, Kelli, your recommendation came to me from my boss, Allison, and I don't know if she spoke to you, but she told me to try and essentially get in touch, so I did, and I'm really grateful that you did decide to come on. I wanted to ask, like, what's your story? Like, why are you doing this kind of work?
Well, Brian, it's a bit of a journey to get here, but I'll give you the sort of short 5-minute version, I guess. So,
Yeah.
Growing up, I wanted to be a police lady, and I, took a lot of the steps to get into policing, one of which was working in corrections. And when I worked in corrections, I remember seeing like a disproportionately large number of men in the system. And I mean, I'd grown up around some abusive women, so it didn't make sense to me that there was more men in prison than women, because I thought, women are just as bad, right? And I never got the answer to that question. Then fast forward, I did get into the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and eventually did specialize in working in sex crimes, particularly sex crimes committed against children with an international component. So after the advent of the internet, we started to get a large influx of files that were involving cases of production, distribution, possession of child pornography or child sexual abuse images. So we, of course, would end up seizing computers, doing searches on these computers. And, I also did sort of undercover work online, and we were seeing a lot of images that contained boys and men. So it kind of opened my eyes to the issue. And then Sheldon Kennedy, I'm not sure if you're familiar with who he is, but he was one of the first pro athletes to ever come forward, first man that I ever knew of to come forward and publicly admit that he'd been sexually abused. So we brought him in, and he came and talked to us about his abuse. And I'm telling you, it just shocked me, but it also started to make things sort of make sense as to why there might be so many boys and men getting caught up in the system. Because, of course, this was in early 2004, 2003. There was absolutely no supports for boys and men. So my heart really went out to him. I mean, he talked about the reasons why he hadn't disclosed his abuse sooner, some of which were things like his abuser was his hockey coach, and he was a pro hockey player. He went on to play for the Calgary Flames, the Chicago teams, and several big teams. And he knew his coach had the means to get him to where he wanted to go. He knew he had the talent to get there. So, he tolerated this abuse, so to speak. Yeah. Also, his family was quite poor. His new career was lifting him and them out of poverty. The whole community was proud of him. He didn't want to disappoint anybody. And this one broke my heart. He said he felt like other parents of his teammates knew, but did nothing. And I was just stunned at that, honestly. And at the time, of course, we were being inundated with child files. And I just remember thinking, man, I wish I could make a difference. Like, in this area, right? Like I was heartbroken, but it was like, okay, well, what I'm doing is important too, which was, researching, investigating sex crimes committed against children and taking out the offenders. So, ironically though, one of the things that he talked about was how he lived such a double life. Like he said, on one hand, I was a pro hockey player, but on the other hand, I was an abuse victim. And at the time, I was going through crazy bullying. Like it had totally affected my health. I ended up leaving the RCMP because of it. And I went into my own state of depression. And I was thankful that I'd already started my master's degree, not because I wanted to be a psychologist, but because I was on the career trajectory to be a criminal profiler with the RCMP. And I mean, I just decided to stay in school. I was trying to figure out my life. And one of my professors mentioned that he worked at this place that serviced only male survivors of sexual abuse. And I kid you not, Brian, it was like a little light went off inside of me again. I was like, I could get on board for this. I could advocate for boys and men. I remember what Sheldon Kennedy said. And literally that's how I got involved. I just decided that, I thought, as a woman, there would be a lot of men that wouldn't want to talk to a man about this, or wouldn't be able to hear what a man might have to say about this, or wouldn't trust them. So I just thought, what the heck? I'll just be a woman advocating for male survivors of sexual abuse. So here I am.
Yeah. Wow. That's
a crazy story.
Yeah, it is a crazy story. You mentioned that you were experiencing a lot of bullying. Now, maybe that's not at all related to the work you do, but I just had to ask, like, what is that just a personal thing that you were going through, or is there like a connection between like the work that you are doing and the bullying that you got?
I really, I understood what he meant by living a double life, because I totally was too. I mean, even one of my clients said the same thing today. Like, I pretend to be holding it all together at work, and then, just go home and fall apart because it was so intense. And that's what Sheldon Kennedy was describing, that, in the public eye or when he was on the ice, he tried to hold it together and he tried to look like everything was okay. But then, he knew he wasn't okay. And that was my reality too for a long time, until I finally got out of that toxic environment.
Yeah. Yeah. So what kinds of interesting facts did you get while you were, I suppose, getting your book together? What are some things that you learned about, maybe like some shocking things you learned about men, male victims of sexual abuse, things like that?
Well, I actually did my own doctoral research examining why boys and men weren't reporting, and I was very shocked at some of the things I found. I mean, maybe other people knew this, but I didn't. One of the things that shocked me was that so many boys and men can actually have memory loss about it, probably because, it's just so intolerable, and they'll actually block it for years until they're in a safe place, or their abuser's dead, or somebody happens to ask the right question at the right time, and then boom, all their memories come flooding back to them. That surprised me. As a police lady, we'd kind of been instructed not to take statements from anybody who had repressed memory because we didn't understand it. But now, as a trauma therapist, I know that that's like the body's most extreme response to trauma.
Yeah.
Some of the other things that shocked me, and again, like, maybe this wouldn't be a shock to you, but to me, I examined the reasons boys and men, like a lot of the abuse that I looked at, it had happened in their youth. So these boys, a lot of them remained quiet because they felt like their parents couldn't handle the truth. Like they didn't want to, their parents already had enough on their plate, and they didn't want to burden their parents further. And that blew my mind. These poor little boys carrying this huge burden and keeping this terrible secret, and just, I guess also, another thing that surprised me was how many boys and men did not recognize their abuse as abuse.
Yeah, it's very different the way that men and boys even how they process this stuff. Like you mentioned, so first of all, it doesn't really surprise me that much because I think that boys, they care a lot about their parents, and they want to make their life easy, and they feel like, and I don't know if it's because they're boys, but I suspect that probably plays a factor.
I
They're
think
like,
so.
well, yeah, because they're like, I don't want to be a burden on my parents, just like you said. So I'm not going to tell them about this, and
Mhm.
I'm just going to like get through it, you know? And it is not fair. Like, that should not be happening. But I do think that it does happen. And I think that it doesn't matter like if the abuser is male or female or what. Like, they generally are going to try and protect the people around them from the truth, and because they don't want to make things worse. And it doesn't, I know that a lot of people might find that irrational, but it is like logical in the mind of these people. And the other thing is, you mentioned that hockey player,
Mhm.
and the what he did was essentially he had an opportunity to provide and protect for his family as a hockey player. And so he basically decided that being sexually abused by his coach was worth it to do that. And so that, like, that's just kind of like, it's one of these things that men do that a lot of people take for granted, and obviously they shouldn't have to do that. Like that, you know, that is abhorrent. But if he is the guy who is supposed to, like, you know, provide for his family and his parents and whatever, right? He wants to pull them all out of poverty. I think that he's like willing to endure that because he's thinking in the long run it's probably going to be worth it. So and I think this is like another one of these things that men, if they're you know, good men, generally healthy, whatever, they will do that. They will do that for their parents, the women in their lives, their children, and they will basically set aside their own needs. And
Mhm.
you know, I think that's what that was. At least that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, I think, I mean, in both those instances, I don't know that they would use the language that they were willing or that it was worth it. I think they would think of it more as it was necessary, and they were
Yeah,
bartering themselves for someone else's good, through someone else, right? Like,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. It was just like a
like,
bartering thing.
yeah, I wouldn't say they were necessarily willing or would say it was worth it, but I think they
Hmm.
would say it was necessary.
Yeah, I guess that is a better way to put it.
Okay.
Um, so uh, I have another statistic here that I wanted to ask you about, but I'm not seeing it on my list anymore. Um, that's okay. So, what like do you guys get a lot of uh support for the work that you do? Like, how well do you think you do in that department? Like, do people like, are you guys like a nonprofit? Um,
Honestly, I am just like self-published. This is just me publishing my research. There's no
yeah.
we, it's just me.
Oh, so it's
But
just you. Okay.
yeah, and
Yeah.
honestly, no. Like people still don't want to talk about this. Like, I mean, people's attitude is generally this is not happening in my backyard. Like, I don't people still say like, in their minds, I don't know anybody that was abused, or, I can protect my own kids, that kind of thing. And I really think that, as boys and men, are starting to come forward, more are starting to come forward. And thankfully, more people, especially professionals, are starting to recognize this. But yeah, no, largely people still kind of put it on the back burner and say, either I don't think this is happening in my backyard, or I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah. That seems like the par for the course. It seems like it's normal. So I'm looking at your Amazon page for your book, and overall, you have nothing but, you know, nice people saying very nice things. But
Except one.
but there is one, yeah, and I wanted to read it.
Yeah.
This is one by John Turner, and he gives it 1 star and says hateful. And then it just says, this book is pages after page of hateful vitriol, but by an author that doesn't know what they're talking about. Like, have you ever had, I know that this is like a one-off, and, you know, it seems like it, but how popular do you think that sentiment could be?
Do you know what? Truthfully, Brian, that came up about a week after I fired a client, and I honestly thought it was probably him, but I don't know that he would go to that much trouble to create a, you know, because it had to be, I honestly don't think he'd purchase a book in order to do that. So that theory may be out, but you know, I've had 3 pieces of criticism, that one, and then a couple times, you know, in different psychology pages, like one I can't remember which psychology page I had just posted about this book, but by the time I saw the criticism, other people had defended me. So it was like, like the point was kind of moot because other people had just shut them down. So, I mean, I haven't had to fight my own battles in that regard, really.
Yeah. I just thought it was a funny review because we often get a lot of resistance from people talking about when we want to talk about men's issues because they think that we are trying to distract away from women's issues. And of course, we believe that, you know, if people have issues, we should talk about them. It doesn't matter, you know, but we also think that men are really, really underserved. And one of the things that I think is really funny about that is that not that I think that someone should prioritize one gender over another, but if one gender is affected by something, like there's a lot of abuse going on that no one is talking about, it will have an effect on the other gender. Like
Absolutely.
like we don't escape that. Like I have always said, and maybe you have research that backs this up. I have always said that if we have a problem with criminal male behavior, you know, whether it's violent crime or if it's assaults and robberies or rape or whatever, if we have an issue with that, we should be looking at the histories of these criminals, because I believe that you'll find that they have all experienced abuse. And it, you know, it might just be physical, but it's often I'm in the United States, and I grew up in Chicago. And in Chicago, there was a lot of unspoken sexual abuse going on in the urban areas, you know, because that's where I grew up. And we knew it was going on. And what it would usually result in is in dysfunctional boys. Now, if this stuff happened to girls, they had resources, so we could hopefully, you know, get them help and they'll bounce back. But with boys, we didn't even pay attention. And I think that this is the reason why I think it's really important to talk about the kinds of things that happen to boys. And it means that we have to like accept that it does happen to boys.
Well, not only in the past have boys and men not been given the attention, they've been told it's not possible that it happens, right? Or they were, right? So, and you're exactly right. Like, it isn't about placing one gender above the other. I just saw that this was an extremely underserved population. And I always say I have a big mouth. I'm trying to use it for good, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. So, right now you're basically just putting together a bunch of research that you've done. And I guess, do you have like another ambition or something else that you want to do that maybe like would help boys more directly?
Well, I work with only adults, and my research is all done, but I am going to reach out to a professor in the US who's researched violence and is still doing research to see if he sees a connection between domestic violence and sexual abuse specifically. And you're right though. We have to be careful with that, because we know that predators will, like those who offend against boys in particular, will always say, most often say, that they too were abused. There's actually research about this done by I don't know if it's done by Dr. Anna Salter or she just discusses it. She's got a book on predators, and great book. She says one of the things she reports is that, like, she interviewed and studied the high-risk psychopathic sex offenders, and of course they all claim that they were, or most of them claim that they were abused in their youth. But she points out that when they were simply threatened with the polygraph, 40% of them renege on that initial disclosure, right? So I mean, having said that, I do think that a lot of there's a project in the US called the Compassion Prison Circle, which they go into the prisons and they work with these like lifer inmates, and they examine, like, they call them their ACE scores, adverse childhood event scores, right? And they're all like way high up there. Yeah. And I think it's not just about the fact that these men were abused as boys. It's a bigger issue than that. It's a systemic issue, because one of the things that happens is, if you have like you said, if a young girl is sexually abused, she's allowed to talk about it. She's allowed to go tell her parents about it. She goes for therapy. She gets all people monitoring her, supporting her, making sure she has all the resources possible. Boys are still being told that boys don't get abused, boys don't cry, boys always want sex. Anytime a boy has an erection, it's by choice, all those kinds of things. And so that sends such a message to them that they stay quiet, and then they deal with their abuse themselves. So now you've got a traumatized boy trying to pay attention in math class, maybe disrupting and becoming the class clown, or isolating himself, or worse yet, like turning to substances or even suicide, because he doesn't have the support. So if you have a child that's been abused, before he graduates high school, his chances of completing high school with good grades are very much diminished, because he's now remembering all of his abuse memories when he's supposed to be paying attention to math and science.
Yeah. And that is happening. Like, girls are outpacing boys in education on every level. And oh yeah, it's like they do 60% better than boys do, or something like that. But this isn't even, like, I'm not even including like any boys that might be dealing with abuse or trauma at the same time. It's just that like the education system as it currently exists, it is catered to the needs of girls, like the learning ways of being female, right? So they do better in class. They're more likely to pay attention. They're more likely to get higher grades. And the boys, because they're not, I did some teaching, and I was a substitute, so I'm not going to take too much credit. But none of the curriculum was targeted to make boys interested. None of the reading, it wasn't like adventure stories or something that boys could get into. And the boys just weren't doing well, and they don't, and this affects them later, because like how well you do in education affects your earning potential. And boys, even when they're really young and maybe they don't, they're not thinking about this stuff, on some intuitive level they have to know that if they're not successful as adults, then they're not going to easily find, a wife, for example, especially if the women are doing better than the men, because that means they're going to be looking for men who do better than they do. And that's going to like shrink the pool down more. So, and I mean, that's just one other factor. So, I think it is really tough to be a young man right now. I don't know if it's been, despite the fact that we still live in a first world country and everything, but I do worry about that. So I was gonna ask about something else. So male sexual abuse. You talked a little bit about predators and how sometimes they lie about their own history, or at least they they don't want to be tested on that. Um, have you heard about what goes on in, and I don't know if you guys have those in Canada. You're in Canada, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So my wife's from Calgary, but
Oh, I'm just north of there.
oh, like Edmonton or something?
Yeah, close to Edmonton.
Oh, okay, cool. Um, so okay, so what I was gonna say is that so we had talked about, I don't know, I'm sorry, I'm like dropping my uh
Train of thought.
yeah, my train of
You
thought
think
has
that's
gone off
me?
the rails. Gone off the rails.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
You were asking me if I've seen
Oh,
something that you're aware of.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. Thank you.
No worries.
Okay, so in the United States, and I don't know if if there are facilities like this in other countries, and it's probably similar. There is a real serious problem with boys being sexually assaulted in juvenile detention facilities
Mhm.
by female guards.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and it might be something worth looking into because um in terms of like what the effects of that might be, right?
Right. Yeah.
And
Wow.
I think that that was something else I wanted to bring up, to your attention in case you don't know. So,
I'm not surprised, but it makes me sad, especially as an ex-police lady, like, that's horrific. And yeah, I mean, I'm not like super involved with any correctional institutes here. So, and nor would they likely admit that that's a problem, right?
mhm.
Um, yeah,
That's
that, I
true.
mean, that again, it doesn't surprise me. Like, here's the thing, Brian. Predators will put themselves in positions where they will have access to children. So if those female guards had intended to, sexually abuse children or boys, they would put themselves in that career. What we are seeing more of, and what you're talking about, is female offenders.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah, you are.
Mhm.
And is this like there's a growing number, or is this because people are starting to pay attention?
I mean, I don't know the answer to that. My thoughts would be both.
Yeah.
My thoughts would be probably both. Because, in the past, Brian, male sexual abuse has been viewed as a coming of age experience when it's been an older female, or as a homosexual act when it's been perpetrated by a man. So I mean, we're only now starting to label it properly. So yeah, I don't know. I honestly think it's a bit of both. I think we are getting more female offenders, but I think more boys are talking about it too.
Yeah, yeah. And in your book, I guess you did some interviews
Mm-hmm.
with survivors.
Yep.
So it says, according to this other review, it says you interviewed 13 survivors to expertly describe the damaging consequences, including conversion disorders, disassociation, normalization, and substance abuse, to name but a few. The effects are often multiple and reinforcing. The cases are real, using pseudonyms and no personal information. Right, of course. They are not exaggerated or embellished, and they are frequently harrowing. So, the 13 male survivors, are they all adults when you spoke to them? Like, and they
Yes,
were
they
just sort
were.
of recalling, like, okay, they were recalling their abuse as children.
Yeah, they
Um,
were.
yeah, and uh, were was there any? And I don't know if you could talk a little bit about this, but were there any especially like harrowing stories from that?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. No, there were I want to say all of them were. All of
Yeah,
them were especially disturbing, right? I
yeah.
mean, from being abused by a bio parent, I would before I honestly where I actually consulted with like some of the leading experts in the field after I collected my data, because I was like, are you kidding me? This is what's happening? And they're like, yep. So yeah, like just like, you know, the extreme responses too, right? I mean, of course, not all men have that response, but some of the men I interviewed had dissociative identity disorder in the end. It's not to say they don't remember their, like, they don't know the details of their abuse. They absolutely do. But yeah, like stories of boys being abused from very, very early infancy by their bio parents. That blew my freaking mind. I could not imagine. And, you know, pastors, people going into the ministry, you know, and then abusing their own children. It blew my mind. Yeah, some of them abused their whole life. One of the first in my book, no, sorry, in my research I only highlighted 3 of the men, but in my book I give a bigger, more graphic detail of all the boys' lives. And yeah, like one of them abused by his mother and her boyfriend. She prostituted him out. And like he literally, like he's probably in his 70s now, so this was a long time ago. And like he told me when he was like 10, he remembers starting to count the days and years till he could move out on his own. I can't even imagine how horrified he would have been.
Yeah, that sounds terrible. You know, absolutely horrible. And do you know if these experiences did they have? I mean, obviously it's trauma, but do you think that their behaviors were affected by that? Like, did they become violent or antisocial or anything like that? Like, you know, having trust issues with other adults?
I would say all of them would have trust issues, right? Whether that would be, I can't trust my partner to stay if I tell her what happened, right down to I can't trust anybody, right? So yeah, a varying degree, but yeah, all of them had trust issues. I don't believe any of them had issues with violence. Most of them went on to be professionals, so that was something worth paying attention to.
That's
right?
good.
Like, yeah, like these were not like street people that I pulled off the street. These were CEOs of large corporations, engineers, like people in law enforcement. Yeah. Yeah.
That was gonna be my next question. Like, you know, if they were like they managed after all that to become like, you know, productive members of society, like which is
Yeah.
kind of miraculous, to be honest.
Well,
You
and
know?
yeah, and that was another surprise for me too. Yes, every one of them. So it's such a good lesson for people though, right? Because I mean, it's easy to say walk through, you know, the homeless population downtown and go, yeah, he was probably abused. But you know, like the wife who's you know, there's just so many other ways that abuse can impact a man, right? Like from, you know, needing to be drunk to be intimate to, you know, just drinking excessively or working excessively in order to repress his memories, to keep forgetting them, right? So, I mean, a lot of people would not typically suspect their spouses had gone through this type of abuse because they've never said anything. And sometimes the men don't even recognize it as abuse either. They might know, yeah, that was one of the guy's stories in, yeah, he didn't recognize what had happened to him as abuse. Like he thought he'd, you know, like, because of the grooming process, extensive grooming usually happens with a boy. Typically,
Yep.
the offender will befriend them and befriend their family, spend weeks, months, even years, you know, as that trusted person. And then the offender typically tries to portray their abuse of the child as sort of their relationship progressed into this homosexual relationship, right? So yeah, oftentimes the boys are confused about whether or not they were willing participants and they stay silent. Whereas if you look back, the offender has done this multiple times over. That was his intent the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Gross.
Yeah, that is gross. That is gross. I'm gonna look in the live chat really quick to see if anyone has a question. If any of you guys have a question for Kelli, then go ahead and send it through and tag my name at Badger Live Streams in the live chat. It looks like a lot of people are just sort of talking about their personal experience or people they might have acquaintances with that have experienced abuse as children. So what is do you think that what are the first steps to getting men to talk about their trauma? Like, how do we get them to speak out more and seek help?
Honestly, we have to educate ourselves, which is like the one of two primary goals of my book was to teach people like what are the impacts of abuse, why are boys and men not talking about it. So we have to understand how it happens, we have to understand why they don't want to talk about it, like their struggles, and we have to create a safe environment so that they feel comfortable talking about it.
Yeah. And okay, so this is something I hear a lot about, and about the concept of a safe environment or a safe space so that people can discuss their problems. And one of the things that I've noticed is that men don't generally respond well to that. But I think that if you I guess what it is when people hear that, they think it's going to be like, a bunch of people sitting in little folding chairs in a circle, like an Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And they're all just sort of like sharing and going around and all that. And what I've noticed is that it works for some men, but I've also noticed that what works for men is if we are sort of doing some activity together, like we go fishing or we go for a hike or something like that, and then we all just kind of like sit in nature or whatever and have some beers, whatever, and then you can probably get the men to talk. And I don't know why that is the case, but I do think that there's a little bit of a difference with when men are ready to share and when other people are. And so that's just like what I've noticed, because I work with some men's groups, and there's one called XY Crew, and there was another one that for some reason I'm not remembering right now, and they would go and on little camping trips or things like this, and then like they'll share some of their feelings and thoughts with other men. And I think it says something about how that works, and
trust, bonding,
and
distraction.
Exactly. And then they can probably better deal with whatever from their past. So go ahead,
Brian, could I just add, like, one of the things that I talked about in my book is that boys and men, well particularly men, well, boys too, I guess, don't typically talk about things if they don't hear other people talking about it first, because they don't want to be thrown out of the group, right? They don't want to look as the odd duck or the guy who can't handle his emotions or whatever, right? They don't want to be treated differently. They don't want pity typically, right?
Right.
So, I mean,
that's big.
Yeah. Right. So what you've described out in nature, you got men doing manly things and creating an environment of safety. There's time for them to bond. And then so we have to create safety and opportunity. So they have enough time to feel safe, and then they have the opportunity.
Exactly. And then maybe like there's another guy who has talked about this stuff before, and he sort of initiates, and it invites the other men to like add to it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting at, and I think that's what we should be encouraging, um, because
You're doing it right now.
yeah, I guess I am. I guess
You
so.
are. Yeah.
Yeah. So
You know,
go ahead. What were we gonna say?
I was gonna say, like you were saying the people in the chat are just discussing their own
That's
experiences.
true. They are.
You
Yeah.
could do your own research right now and post, or even I'll just throw it out there. How many of you have never told anybody about this before? How many of you have reported your offender? Probably a minimal amount will have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's probably the case. I guess we'll wait and see if anyone does. But then like the other side of it is that they generally, like you said before, men don't expect that people will want to hear from them. Like that that people want to hear what they have to say.
Men don't expect to be supported, right?
Yeah.
Because there's this myth that, men always want sex, never turn it down, can control their erections all the time,
Yeah.
and right. And, a lot of men in the past, before people were more educated, got very negative responses or their abuse was minimized, right? So the ones that were coming forward got deterred from doing that. And yeah, I believe we're past that now with all the, Penn States and Boy Scouts cases and stuff like that. So
Yeah,
people
that's
are
true.
becoming more aware.
I think they are. I mean, I think that it's still, I don't know if stigmatized is the right word, but it still gets kind of overshadowed by other things. But I do think that, honestly, uh, the state of things is improving a lot. And, more and more men are speaking out about their experiences. I think that, I don't know if you were paying attention to this, but a good example of like how there's been a little bit of a paradigm shift is the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case. I don't know if you were paying attention to that, but he was essentially the real victim of abuse, or at least that's what the evidence pointed at. And the whole media, in the beginning at least, like the media and everybody was like behind Amber Heard because they assumed that because she made an allegation, it must have been true, because she's a woman and he's a man. But as the evidence came out, and it seemed like the reverse was the case, then that sort of like blew a lot of people's minds. Like they were very shocked, but they did end up siding with him now. So I think that's a big deal because
It's about time.
yeah, and it's a high profile case, but beyond that, like it basically says, look, this can happen to men, and this is a good example of that. And I think that people were like, wow, why didn't I think of this before? Why didn't I consider this a possibility?
That women lie too? Give me a break.
That
right?
women are capable of lying, that women are capable of abuse. Yeah, like it's like this unbelievably novel thing now. Well, it was. Now I think people are like, this, okay, women are human as well, which means that they're capable of doing bad things.
I would say that people still probably view it as a one-off more than anything.
Oh,
honestly, I'm sorry, but like
I get it.
Huh?
I said I get it. I'm a bit of an optimist, so but yeah.
Oh, good. I'm sorry. I'm a bit of a pessimist. I'll try not rain on your parade here. I really hope that's the case. Like, I've got clients that have been wrongfully accused of horrible things too, and I'm like, give me a break. Give me 5 minutes alone in the room with that lady, and I'll have her telling the truth. Like, I'll call her bluff. You know what I mean? Like, but I mean, people are so afraid to do that. And I mean, yeah, women lie. And anyway, yeah,
Yeah,
sorry.
no, you're right.
You know,
All
and
that's
of course
true.
I know women are victims too. I don't need 10,000 emails about how women are victims. I'm just saying men are victims too, right? Like, and I saw that in my policing. I think that's also part of why I wanted to get involved with this, right? Like, we went to the same house over and over and over again. This woman used to beat the crap out of her husband, and she was a total sweetheart when she was sober, but it was like she had an aversion to alcohol. She could not handle her alcohol. She turned into like, I don't know, you know, just terrible.
Yeah. Oh, I found that statistic that I was trying to bring up before. It was actually on your Twitter feed. And it
Oh.
says only 16% of men with documented histories of sexual abuse considered themselves to have been abused.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. So it basically means only 16% of men of like what, you know, I guess you could say a set of men actually considered that they have been abused. So that means that like
Actually, yeah.
84% of men didn't.
With known histories of sexual abuse too, right?
Mhm.
Like they'll describe what happened to them, but they don't consider it sexual abuse. But
Yeah.
yet it meets criteria for sexual abuse.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of, I do believe that men largely do this sort of like to guard the people that they know, but also to kind of guard themselves. So they think that if they don't act
Absolutely.
like it's a big deal, then it's not a big deal, right? But
Until it is.
until it is, exactly, until like I don't know, like if you do that, if you pretend as though what happened to you either did not happen or it just isn't that big of a deal and you just move on, is that going to resurface? Like, are you going to suddenly realize your trauma? Do you know if
Well,
that's something that could
absolutely. And there
happen?
was a few examples of that. I encourage you to read my book, Brian, if you're interested in the subject, because yeah, one of the men, I think his name was Michael in the book. He talked about exactly that. Like he'd been abused at an early age, like young age, maybe 13. I can't remember the exact age, but he just decided that, you know what, I'm just going to forget that, right? But
Mm-hmm.
yet, you know, his body didn't forget. And you know, our bodies can get triggered by anything in our environment that reminds us of our abuse, right?
Yeah.
So when he's not able to stay regulated as an adult, he's now turning to alcohol. Well, now his wife doesn't like him drinking so much, you know, and it affects his marriage. He winds up divorced. So yes, it does come back, but he said like it took him, his wife leaving him, for him to even consider, you know, and he, exactly what you described. He went away. He actually went away. He had a friend that was going out to cut some firewood or whatever. So he just went to make sure his friend didn't kill himself with his chainsaw out in the bush alone. And
Yeah.
his friend ended up disclosing to him that he'd been sexually abused. And then all of a sudden he realized the impact of his abuse too.
Mm. Yeah, that makes, see, that's what I'm saying. That makes perfect sense.
Other
Um,
men sometimes turn to like excessive work to avoid, you know, to stay completely distracted from the other images that are popping in their head. They'll become workaholics, or they engage in like acts of hypermasculinity, you know, high risk, dangerous sports or excessive weightlifting, or they start engaging in promiscuity because they want to, you know, they need to continue to prove to themselves their masculinity. So yes, it does impact men, whether or not they recognize the impact.
that all of it makes a lot of sense. And so, and I think that we are living in a time where there is probably a very high rate of men who experienced abuse. And I that's what I believe. I believe that it's like I don't know if it's the majority, but I think that it's a lot, and it's a higher number than most people would accept. And I think that it's affecting men and the men around them and their perception of their own masculinity. Because yeah, go ahead. What were we gonna say?
Oh, I was just going to say I could not agree more.
Oh, okay. All right, good. Yeah, because it seems like uh there is a like sort of like on the internet space, but I think this is actually a wider problem beyond that. There are a lot of men trying to figure out what it means to be a man, and I think that there is a lot of confusion, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of frustration, but I think that there is also abuse. And I think that, like, for example, I grew up in Chicago in the part of the city where it was minorities like Latinos like myself or blacks. And one of the things that I noticed was how lucky I was at the time to be one of very few people who grew up with my father and my mother in the home at the same time.
Yeah.
And that was so unusual. And one of the things that I noticed, and obviously I didn't notice it that in that moment, but later when I reflected, back on how I guess lucky I was that my father was, in my life and my mother was in my life.
And still together.
Yeah, and they were perfectly complementary parents, you know. And but the children and my peers that lived in the neighborhood, they didn't have that. And what I noticed is that there was not just like dysfunction from that, but there was a lot of abuse, either from single mothers who statistically are more likely to beat their children if there's no father there, because they get stressed out and they feel like they're doing this alone, etc.
And maybe even turn to the neighbor boy for sex.
Yeah, exactly. And they do. And that's another thing, is that there's a lot of, single mothers sleeping with local kids, and they're not thinking too much about their age. And there's also accidental incest, and it's really messed up, but people don't generally know about it, where you have like, let's say that in that neighborhood, because these people don't usually leave the neighborhoods that they are growing up in, and so you'll have like, they'll live in a home for multiple generations. So in this particular area, maybe there's like 10 men who are like the top men in terms of like their market value, and they're the ones that the women all want, and so they'll sleep with those men. Those men won't get married to them or anything like that. So they won't be in anything committed. They'll impregnate those women. They won't get involved with the raising of those children because they were never that kind of man. And then those children will grow up, and the girls will hit puberty much earlier, because if there's no father in the home, girls hit puberty earlier, like around 9 or 10 or something, and they will start seeking men because they become sexually active, or a lot earlier, and they will be seeking boys, and they may, and there's actually a decent chance of it, find a boy that's in their age range that they think are attractive, and they might sleep with them and have a baby with them, and those two people might be related and not know it, because because the women are sharing a very small pool of men, right?
Wow. Yeah.
So
almost like in the communes and stuff, right?
Yeah, and but it does happen, and it is a shame. But I think this is the cycle. I'm basically talking about a cycle, and part of that cycle is abuse. But there's other problems that come with it, and these are the things that, when you think about it as in terms of like, what's the solution? It's harrowing because there's so many factors. But I think that to some degree, I think it starts with helping men. Because it's the one thing we're not doing.
Educating the public that this is going on, because sure, in this one little community, it might be something everybody knows but doesn't talk about. But I think, I don't know, there's larger communities that are in denial about this. And
absolutely,
honestly, Brian, like, to be blunt, I honestly thought my book was going to do really well. Like, I spent $40,000 getting it edited. It's very well written. Like, and it's everybody who reads it either says I couldn't keep reading because it was too hard to read, or I couldn't put it down, you know, and they eventually get through it. But my point is that I mean, everybody, I get emails all the time from people who said they read my book and thanking me for how much it changed their life and stuff like this. Yet I still sell 1 copy a week or 2 copies a week lots of times. And it's like, I'm just shocked that, you know, they don't go tell their friends that it was an awesome book, or, you know what I mean? Like, it just hasn't taken off. I guess my point is people still don't want to talk about it.
Yeah. Have you ever considered doing like a podcast or something so that you can?
Oh, I do. I do tons of podcasts.
Oh yeah, that's right. You do. That's right. I saw them. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and it always is productive or fruitful, but I mean, I've got some bigger ones that I've done that just haven't come out yet. Like Focus on the Family Canada just did a day and a half with me, and they're just waiting for Focus on the Family US to get on board, and then they're going to do that, and I think that'll help. But honestly, I do believe it's about creating awareness, and yeah. I would love to see my book be required curriculum in the schools.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that'd be super useful.
Oh, totally. I think it would prevent abuse.
Yeah, tell us about the book, because I think that some people are interested in the book. And
my book is called Men Too. Like, it's supposed to be a play on the words Me Too, right? So Men Too, Unspoken Truths About Male Sexual Abuse. It's based entirely on my own research, my doctoral research. And yes, I did 13 case studies where I interviewed each of these men specifically about why they didn't talk about their abuse. And in doing that, like, parts of their story came out, you know, like, well, I was really young, and like, I don't give graphic details of the abuse. Like, there's no, like, well, there's 2 minor descriptions, not minor descriptions, but it's not super graphic. Like, it's not about the act of the abuse so much as how much it impacted these boys. And some of them do describe their abuse being, you know, anally raped and stuff like that, which of course is horrific. But yeah, I just talk about, like, I use their stories and their responses as opportunities to provide clarity around what they're talking about. Like, you know, you mentioned like a conversion disorder or dissociation. So as they describe what was going on, I have like psychoeducational text boxes describing, you know, or, you know, just adding to what they've said. So it's really meant to first support male survivors of sexual abuse so that they don't think they're the only one this ever happened to, and so that they can make better sense of what's happened to them. And then just to support, you know, to educate, helping professionals about the reasons that they don't disclose, and maybe some areas, you know, for example, if a man is describing that he's engaging in excessive weightlifting or drinking a lot, you could bring up that example. Oh, lots of boys who turn into men that were abused choose these behaviors, you know?
Yeah.
Or, you know, just to educate the general public that, you know, for example, if you suspect something isn't quite right with Johnny, your instincts might be right. So
yeah. Well,
that's what my book is about. Yeah.
And let's get a look at it so that then if they look it up, I did put a link to your Amazon page. So that's the book right there, guys. Men Too.
Are we live? I thought we were just audio.
Oh no, we are live and on camera.
Oh my goodness, I've been drinking tea and playing with my hair. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I thought I had made it clear. I apologize for not. Oh, you know what? The channel is called Honey Badger Radio.
Oh, well, now everybody will see my red face.
Yeah,
my cat didn't walk across the screen.
I didn't come up with that because it does occasionally confuse people. Oh. But yeah, it was a live stream, camera and everything. So,
well, hello everybody.
Fairly certain.
Yes, this is my book. I usually do this down in my office where I have a large poster of it, but this is my book. It's on Amazon. It's called Men Too: Unspoken Truths About Male Sexual Abuse. That's my first book. And then I have myself and a colleague also wrote a children's series book children's series meant to help parents have those difficult conversations with their kids about grooming and about human trafficking.
Yeah, that's a really, I think that might be a pretty relevant topic today. I noticed that there's a lot of concern over grooming. And, you know, it just makes me wonder, like, how long has this been going on? So, yeah, it's terrible. But, okay, so we are out of time. Kelli, thank you. Sorry for the last minute bit of embarrassment. I don't think you picked your nose once. So if that helps, if that's helpful.
I'll just deny it. Okay. No,
I had an itch.
And
an itch.
I'm grateful for any opportunity to talk about this. So
yeah, this is good stuff, and I'm really glad that you're doing this work. And like I said, I have links to your book and your website and your Twitter. So you might, I don't know if you use your Twitter very much, but you might get some followers.
Does.
Yeah. I noticed that it's not like super active, but still everybody wants to know the Twitters for some reason. So I'm sharing it.
I have an assistant who does that, and she was down with COVID for months. So I am really terrible with tech stuff. And I've actually been busy trying to get these books published, and I'm working on a workbook for male survivors. So that's kind of why I don't do that.
Oh, that's nice.
A full-time practice.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to when you said a workbook for male survivors.
Trying in the process, yeah.
Yeah, well, maybe when you feel good enough about it, we can have you back on and talk about it. It sounds really.
Thank you so much.
Really
Love
great.
to.
All right, great. Okay,
Hey,
so I want to thank my guest, Kelli, for coming on, and I want to thank you guys for joining us. If you like this video, please smash the like button. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications so you know when our streams go live. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you guys think about what we discussed. Check out the links in the description. And most importantly, please share this video, because sharing is caring. Thank you guys so much for coming on today's episode of the Fireside Chat. We'll see you guys in the Patreon show. And we'll see you all in the next video.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.